This house used to hum with life. 70 years, built by my own hands and dreams. Now, it just echoes. Since Maria left 3 years ago, the silence has settled into the walls like dust. Heavy, suffocating dust. I am Elias. I am 78 years old. And according to my children, I am taking up too much space. I remember the day Daniel, my eldest, first brought it up. It was disguised as concern. He stood right here, in the kitchen, where Maria baked every Sunday bread for half a century. He said, "Dad, this house is too much for you. The stairs, the garden. It's a burden." I looked at him. A burden? This house was my skin. It held the echoes of skinned knees and graduation parties, of our first mortgage struggles, and Maria's laughter. Daniel wasn't worried about my health. He was worried about liquidity. My children, Daniel and Clara, are successful. They have their own houses, their own careers. But they see this property, right in the old heart of the city, not as a monument to our lives, but as equity locked up, a very large, very inconvenient safe. They started coming every Sunday, not to spend time with me, but to conduct inspections. They would measure the living room with their eyes. They'd tap the walls, calculating the cost of a modern renovation, always speaking in hushed tones about the market value. I felt myself shrinking in my own home. I was no longer the patriarch. I was the janitor who needed to be retired, the obstacle blocking a major financial transaction. Last month, things changed. They stopped being subtle. It started with the garden. I have always loved my roses. They are fussy, demanding creatures, but they remind me of Maria. Clara came over one afternoon, smelling faintly of expensive perfume and impatience. "Dad, you're paying old Mr. Henderson $300 a month just to water these weeds," she said, looking straight through the award-winning climbing rose bushes. "They are not weeds, Clara. They are prize winners." "They are obsolete, Dad. Think of the maintenance. When we sell, buyers want low-maintenance landscaping. Just grass, maybe gravel." "When we sell," she said, "not if I sell. When?" I didn't argue. Arguing with them felt like shouting into the void. They only heard the sound of their own planning. The tension built slowly, through canceled dinner invitations and missed phone calls, until that specific night. That night was a Sunday. It had started like any other. I cooked a simple roast chicken. They came, ate quickly, complimented the food dismissively, and kept checking their phones. The moment the plates were cleared, I knew. They didn't rush to leave. They exchanged a look, a familiar, conspiratorial look that chilled me deeper than the November air outside. They insisted on washing the dishes, pushing me gently out of my own kitchen. "You rest, Dad," Daniel said, his smile too wide, too smooth. "We need to talk. A family discussion." I sat in. The parlor, the room where Maria and I used to read in comfortable silence. I watched the dust motes dance in the late afternoon sun, already sensing the inevitable darkness. Daniel and Clara eventually joined me. They sat opposite me on the sofa I bought when Daniel was born. They didn't sit beside me. They sat across the room, creating distance, making it formal. "Dad?" Daniel began, folding his hands precisely over his knee. "We love you. That goes without saying." Clara nodded seriously. "Absolutely. And that is why we have made these arrangements." Arrangements. They spoke as if they were discussing seating plans for a wedding. They had decided my future without consulting me, the owner of the life they were scheduling. Daniel pulled a sheaf of papers from his briefcase, real estate brochures. "This house," he gestured broadly, "it's massive, and honestly, it's antique. The roof needs $10,000 worth of work. The plumbing is copper. It's draining your savings." I tried to interrupt. "My savings are fine, Daniel. I manage my affairs." Clara leaned forward, her voice suddenly crisp. "You manage them slowly, Dad. The market is hot right now. If we wait until spring, we could lose $50,000. The truth spilled out then, without any further pretense of love or concern. "We have spoken to a realtor, Dad," Daniel stated. She is ready to list the house tomorrow. The contract is drawn up. I stared at the papers. They were real. Bold typeface, professional logo. They hadn't just discussed selling my home. They had finalized the preparations. I felt a dizzying pressure in my chest. Wait a minute. I have not agreed to sell my house. Daniel sighed, a sound of heavy parental disappointment directed at a difficult child. Look, Dad, be reasonable. You can't stay here. You need help, safety. Clara chimed in, pointing to a brochure, an offensively cheerful picture of a modern beige building. We found the perfect place for you. Willow Creek Residences, independent living, but with meals provided, activities, medical staff nearby. It's secure. It's affordable. We've already put down a holding deposit on a lovely one-bedroom unit. Willow Creek, a cage for the old and forgotten. The humiliation was a physical burn. They had reduced my entire existence, my dignity, my memories, my life's work, to a single disposable unit in a retirement complex. You want me to move out? I said, my voice barely a tremor. You want me to leave Maria's house? It's temporary, Dad, Clara insisted, though her eyes were already calculating the commission split. You'll be closer to us, too. A lie? Willow Creek was 20 miles further away than my current address. No, it's not temporary, I whispered. I finally understood the depth of the betrayal. They didn't see me as their father, but as an asset obstructing their wealth creation. This is not a suggestion, Dad, Daniel said, his voice hardening, the false concern peeling away. It's time. We need access to the capital now. We need you to sign these release forms tonight. We need possession of the house in 30 days. He slid the documents across the highly polished mahogany table. The papers rustled ominously. Sign it, Dad, or we will be forced to pursue legal remedies. Legal remedies. The son I raised, threatening to sue the father who housed and fed him for 2 decades. The room went completely silent. I didn't reach for the pen he offered. I simply sat there, absorbing the wound. 30 days, Clara repeated, tapping her manicured nail lightly on the table. You understand, don't you? It's the best decision for everyone. My blood was cold. My mind, however, was starting to clear. They thought they had me trapped. They thought they had cornered the feeble, grieving old man who had lost his fight when he lost his wife. They saw my grief as weakness, my quietness as surrender. They mistook my shock for compliance. I looked at their expectant, greedy faces. I saw the children I loved, now replaced by 2 callous investors. I pushed the papers back across the table, careful not to touch them. I will not sign, I said, my voice steady now. Daniel's face darkened. Elias, don't be difficult. I ignored the familiar condescension. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. You made arrangements, didn't you? You planned my future. Yes, we did, Clara said triumphantly. That's good, I replied, a strange calm washing over me. Because I too have been making arrangements. Their confidence faltered slightly. They exchanged another look, this one tinged with confusion. What do you mean, Dad? Daniel asked, suspicion creeping into his tone. I reached into the inner pocket of my worn tweed jacket. My hand closed around the thick, folded document I'd kept hidden for over a year. I had walked out of the lawyer's office with it just 2 months after Maria passed, knowing this day would come. I pulled it out slowly, letting them see the official stamp, the heavy seal, the binding. They assumed it was a revised will. They thought I was going to threaten to disinherit them, but they were wrong. The will was irrelevant, at least for now. I placed the document on the table, not pushing it toward them, but holding it centered between us. You came here tonight to evict me from my own home, I said, my voice gaining strength. You threatened me with legal action. Daniel started to reach for the paper. What is this? A deed? No, I told him, looking him straight in the eye. It's a gift. I tapped the paper lightly, right over the notary's signature. You see, children, when you decided that this house was yours, you overlooked one crucial detail of property law. Ownership is 9/10 of the law. but absolute ownership is everything. Clara leaned in, her eyes narrowed, trying to read the legal language upside down. This document, I continued, savoring the sudden tension radiating from them, is proof that you are entirely correct. This house is far too much of a burden for me. So you signed the sale contract? Daniel asked, relief flooding his face, already anticipating the cash wire. No, I didn't sign your sale contract, I confirmed. I signed a document giving this entire property, the house, the land, everything, away. Their faces went slack with shock. To who? Clara stammered. Who did you give our inheritance to? I paused, letting the silence expand into an abyss. This was the moment of quiet power, the pivot point in the game they thought they were winning. Before you could ask me to leave, I ensured that I no longer had the right to let you stay. Daniel laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. This is absurd, Dad. You can't just give away the entire estate without consultation. Oh, but I did, I corrected him gently. It was completely legal and signed and filed, which is why, children, you can't sell this house anymore. I watched them realize the true, devastating implication of my words. They tried to process the loss of millions right before their eyes. I didn't let them recover. I reached for the document and slowly unfolded it, pointing to the crucial, binding clause they hadn't seen coming. You wanted me gone tonight, I said, my voice turning to steel. Well, I need you to leave, because I have a very important conversation tomorrow morning with the new landlord. Daniel finally managed to read the bold header on the paperwork. His eyes widened, fixing on the name of the foundation listed as the new absolute owner. The color drained from his face entirely. I leaned back, finally comfortable in my own chair. The silence was now my ally, heavy with their dawning panic. They thought they had trapped me, but they had merely walked into the very deep, very detailed trap I had spent 3 long, lonely years constructing. And now I had to ensure the trapdoor closed completely. Tomorrow the eviction would be final, but it wouldn't be mine. The echo of Esther's voice was physical. It scraped against the walls I had painted 40 years ago. Va embora, a casa é nossa. Go away. This house is ours. I sat on the edge of the bed that night. I didn't cry. Tears are for grief, and this was worse than grief. This was arithmetic. They were calculating my obsolescence. I looked around the master bedroom. My wife, Clara, had chosen the wallpaper. She died 5 years ago, leaving a silence that had only been filled by the gentle, familiar rhythm of life. Now, that rhythm was broken by the sound of their ambition. I thought back to the conversation we had. It wasn't a discussion. It was a decree, delivered during what was supposed to be a casual family meeting about property taxes. Michael, my son, leaned forward, confident in his tie and expensive watch. Dad, we've talked to the real estate agent. The market is hot. We can get a fantastic price for this place. I remember the confusion. But this is home. Esther rolled her eyes, a gesture learned in childhood, now deployed professionally to dismiss the old man. It was home, Dad. You don't need all this space. It's too much upkeep for one person. They talked about assisted living facilities. They used words like safe, community, and liquidity. They never used the word father. The first change came the next morning. I tried to log into the television streaming service. The password was changed. I walked to the kitchen and found my favorite armchair, the leather one Clara bought me. Gone. Michael had taken it for his new apartment. He texted. He didn't ask. He just informed me. These were small cuts, not the deep legal wound they intended, but 1,000 paper cuts designed to drain my dignity slowly. They started visiting daily, unannounced, not to check on me, to patrol. Esther would open the refrigerator and sigh theatrically at the outdated yogurt. She reorganized my spice rack, tossing out the herbs Clara had dried years ago. Hoarding, Dad, this is hoarding, she'd declare, standing in my kitchen. I watched her move. She wore my house like a costume she was impatient to shed. One afternoon, She stood by the breaker box, a solemn expression on her face. "Dad, we are trying to lower the utility costs until the sale. We've decided to keep the central air at 80 degrees during the day. I had mild arthritis. High heat made my joints seize." I stood silent, watching her flip the switch. She didn't see a father suffering discomfort. She saw a number on a spreadsheet. My mind went back 6 years. The year Clara died. The year the children started talking differently about money. I was broken then, and I was distracted when I signed the new deed transferring the majority ownership to the children, following Clara's complicated estate plan. They assured me it was merely a formality to simplify probate later. But I wasn't entirely naive. 60 years of running a small business taught me that trust must always be verified, especially when large amounts of money are involved. I had visited Mr. Davies, my old solicitor, a man who understood the value of silence and foresight. I remembered the mahogany office, the smell of aged paper. "Arthur," Mr. Davies had said, adjusting his spectacles, "you are giving up control, but you must retain occupancy. Absolute, untouchable occupancy." We had drafted a separate document, a very specific clause inserted into the original deed transfer, a maneuver so technical, so deeply buried in legalese, that most people, including my children's quick, cheap lawyer, would overlook it entirely. I had paid Davies extra to ensure that this particular filing was obscured, placed in a specific secondary appendix, legally binding but visually confusing. I had done it not because I expected my children to betray me, but because Clara had warned me long ago. When the money appears, Arthur, even good people change shape. Sunday lunch used to be sacred. Now it was a property inspection tour. Michael and his wife, Sarah, arrived with architectural blueprints. They spread them across the dining table, the same table where we celebrated my retirement. They weren't eating. They were planning the staging. "We need to remove that hideous wallpaper in the dining room first," Sarah announced, without glancing at me. The wallpaper Clara loved. Michael pointed to the kitchen. "And we need to modernize the appliances. They're too old." "Dad, where's the deed?" "We need the precise square footage for the listing." I was sitting right there, invisible, a ghost at my own feast. "I haven't decided about the sale," I said, my voice low and steady. Michael laughed, a harsh, forced sound. "Come on, Dad, don't be difficult. The decision was made the moment the title transferred. We are simply expediting the inevitable. We are selling the house. You need to be moved out by the end of the month if we want to catch the spring market." The sheer confidence in their eviction order was stunning. They believed their shallow legal reading was absolute. They had forgotten one fundamental truth. I built this place. I owned the history, and I controlled the loophole. That afternoon, Michael began boxing up my office. He started with the memorabilia, my military medals, my retirement clock. "Don't touch that," I commanded. My voice was louder than I intended. He paused, looking genuinely annoyed that his chore had been interrupted. "Dad, it needs to be packed. You won't have room for this junk in the new place." "The new place," I repeated, tasting the bitterness. "I am not moving." Michael put the box down, his face hardening. "We gave you an order, Dad. You have 2 weeks to clear your personal items. If you resist, we will have to file for a formal ejectment notice. You don't want that kind of paperwork, do you? It gets ugly." He was threatening me with a court battle in my own home. I walked away from him. I needed quiet. I needed to breathe the air that wasn't contaminated by their greed. I went into my shed, found the old metal box where I kept my important papers. The box held a manila envelope, 6 years old. Inside was a specific legal document, stapled to a thick blue backing. The right of absolute occupancy, tied specifically to the lifetime use of the land, regardless of ownership transfer. I called Mr. Davies. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur, have they pushed you yet?" "They have served notice. They are packing my life as we speak." "And the document?" he asked. "It is ready," I replied. "I need you here tomorrow morning. I want to serve them with the truth. I want them standing here." In this house they claim to own when the reality hits them. The silence on the line was long. It will be swift, Arthur, and painful for them. Good, I said, looking out at the yard, anticipating the fight. Let it be painful. They tried to cancel my existence. Now I will cancel their investment. The stage was set. The house was theirs on paper, but I held the key to the lock they didn't know existed. The eviction notice was coming, but it wouldn't be addressed to me. The silence that fell after they left was heavier than any argument we ever had. The key they demanded lay cold on the mahogany table. My Maria's table, they had brought paperwork. Formal notice. Sign here, Dad. We need to move on with our lives. My life was this house. It was the only map I had left. I picked up the key. It felt wrong in my hand, small and useless, like the promise of a peaceful retirement. They had calculated everything. The market value, the closing costs, the split among them. But they had forgotten one variable. Me. They assumed that because I was old, I was incapable of resistance. That I would just pack my memories into boxes and leave quietly into the subsidized darkness they had arranged for me. For 2 days, I sat in the armchair by the window. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't eat much. I stared at the lawn where I taught David how to catch a baseball, and the kitchen counter where Sarah used to spill flour while trying to bake. The pain was physical. Not the pain of eviction, but the complete demolition of everything I thought my life had stood for. I raised them to be decent. I taught them that family was the final fortress. They had just breached my walls. From the inside. That night I finally slept, but not peacefully. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since I was a young man starting his own business. I was not defeated. I was just injured. My next action had to be invisible. If they knew I was planning a countermove, they would double down, use lawyers, make it ugly. I needed to use their own arrogance against them. I pulled out the old Rolodex, dusty from years of non-use. I found the number. Elias. Elias Moreno had been my lawyer and my friend for 40 years. He handled the acquisition of this very property. He handled Maria's complicated estate plan after she passed. He was the only person who understood the true, quiet history of this house and its paperwork. I drove across town early the next morning, pretending I was just heading out for coffee. Elias's office was quiet. He didn't ask how I was. He just looked at the papers I handed him, the eviction notice my children had served their own father. He looked at the official stamped signatures. He shook his head slowly. They are operating under the assumption that since Maria's passing, Arthur, your tenancy is merely functional, Elias said, adjusting his glasses. Functional, I repeated, meaning disposable. They believe the deed is clear, and they have the majority stake to force the sale. I nodded. That was their entire strategy. Elias leaned back in his chair. He tapped the top of the document gently. They spent a lot of money preparing this, Arthur. They hired a sharp firm, but they missed one crucial detail. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to stay calm. When Maria and you redid the will 5 years ago, Elias continued, his voice low, we didn't just deal with the transfer of title upon death. We dealt with the use of the property while you were still alive. I remembered the conversation. Maria had insisted. She was worried about me being alone. Elias pushed a thick file across the desk. Inside was a single, laminated document. This, Arthur, is the codicil. A specific clause regarding the right of habitation. It states that as long as you, Arthur Pereira, are alive and physically capable of residing here, no action may be taken to sell or transfer possession of the primary residence. My hands were shaking as I took the paper. They dismissed this as ceremonial boilerplate, didn't they? I asked. They forgot it existed entirely, Arthur, or they assumed it could be easily invalidated through the pressure of probate. Elias looked me straight in the eye. It cannot, not without an active court order proving you unfit, and we both know you are perfectly fit. This was not merely a defense. This was a reversal. The children weren't just trying to evict me from their house. They were trying to sell a house they did not legally possess. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You don't announce it," Elias whispered. "You let them continue their foolishness. You let them set the closing date. You let them spend their time and their money on paperwork that is technically invalid." This plan felt cruel, but no crueler than their actions against me. "We initiate the counterclaim immediately," Elias said, pulling a new document, a writ of possession affirmation. "It simply confirms your current, established legal right to the home. It bypasses their eviction notice completely." This counter-document had to be filed quickly, silently, before they took any further physical steps, like trying to change the utilities or schedule the viewing. The next few days were a blur of cold, quiet efficiency. I was moving against my own children. It felt like tearing a piece of my soul away with every signature. I went through the house, item by item, not packing to leave, but packing strategically. I gathered the essential files, the medical records, the important financial statements, the originals of the property codicil. I opened a small safety deposit box downtown, listing Elias as the only authorized contact besides myself. I secured the counter documents there. My goal was to look outwardly compliant while preparing the devastating legal strike. When Sarah called again, her voice was clipped, businesslike. "Dad, the realtor is scheduling the final walkthrough with the buyers next Tuesday. Have you finished clearing your things?" "I am almost done, Sarah," I lied calmly. "Good. We need the house empty, and the keys secured by Monday night. Don't worry, we've arranged the temporary housing for you." Temporary housing. A small, sterile apartment, miles away from anything familiar. "I appreciate your concern," I said. It was the hardest thing I had ever said without irony. "We just want what's best for you," she insisted. I closed my eyes. They had twisted best into something unrecognizable. "I know what's best for me, Sarah," I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. "It's dignity." I spent that weekend preparing for Monday. I finished securing my retreat. I updated my address with the motor vehicle department. I notified the post office of the change, effective immediately. Every small bureaucratic action was a necessary piece of the machine I was building. The key to the house remained on the mahogany table. I left it there deliberately, a symbol of their perceived victory. But the real power was no longer in the brass key. It was in the documents locked away downtown. Monday morning arrived. I was gone before sunrise, not evicted, but strategically relocated to an inconspicuous temporary place. I sat in my lonely apartment, staring at a blank wall, waiting for the phone call, waiting for Tuesday morning. That's when they would arrive with their buyers and their lawyers, ready to claim their inheritance. They would walk into the empty house, expecting to see the final, humiliating evidence of their father's defeat. Instead, they would find something much, much worse. They would find the trap I had built. All I had to do was wait for them to make their final, confident move. And then, I would show them what I had been quietly preparing. Sophia and Marcus arrived exactly at 9. Not a minute early, not a minute late. They drove a large, rented white van, a professional moving company vehicle. They had not even considered that I might leave voluntarily. They brought tools. They brought a locksmith, a thin man in overalls who looked profoundly uncomfortable being part of a family drama. I met them at the front door. I was standing in the foyer, the place where I had taught them both how to tie their shoelaces decades ago. "Papa," Sophia said, her voice sharp, clinical. She carried a plastic clipboard. She was dressed in new clothes for administration, not mourning. "We need the keys, please," she instructed. "The locks are being changed immediately, for security." Marcus walked past me without a word. He went straight to the living room. He started inspecting the walls, pointing out water damage. "This will be a rental unit in 3 months," he announced to Sophia, ignoring my presence completely. "We need to maximize the return." My home, the house where they were born, was already a unit, an investment opportunity. I watched them divide the space. My life was already gone in their eyes, just inventory to be processed. "I have a few boxes left." I managed to say. My throat felt thick, dusty. Sophia sighed dramatically. She looked at her watch. Honestly, Papa, we told you last week. This is what delays everything. You should have been packed. She treated me like a poorly scheduled delivery driver. I need 5 minutes, I repeated, quieter this time. I looked down at the worn wooden floor. I needed to appear defeated, compliant. I turned and walked slowly towards the small, antique writing desk. It sat in the dark hall, rarely used. They probably intended to sell it next week. I kept my back to them, masking the slight tremor in my hands. The desk had a middle drawer. I pulled it open. Inside, taped meticulously beneath the thin velvet lining, was the thick official envelope. It was heavy. It was cold. It held the truth that they refused to see. Mr. Elias, the lawyer, had been very specific about the timing. Do not show them until they are physically on the property, until they initiate the eviction. Because once they initiated it, they crossed the line from discussion to actionable intrusion. I closed the drawer, letting the wood click sharply in the silence. I turned back to face them. Marcus was arguing with the locksmith about the quality of the new deadbolts. Sophia was checking things off her clipboard, already calculating profits. They hadn't even realized I was holding the legal maneuver in my hand. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drum in an otherwise quiet house. Before I hand over the keys, I said, and this time the voice was firm, resonant. It was the voice I used to use in the boardroom, the voice they hadn't heard in years. They both stopped talking. They looked at me, annoyance plain on their faces. You need to read this first. I stepped forward and held the envelope out to Sophia. My arm didn't shake anymore. She didn't take it immediately. She scowled, confused. She probably thought it was an invoice for a plumber they hadn't hired yet. Finally, she snatched it, impatient. What is this, Papa? Just paperwork? She ripped open the envelope carelessly, folding out the thick legal sheets. She expected to see my handwritten note about needing more time, or maybe an old utility bill. Her expression changed instantly. First confusion, then a sharp, disbelieving focus. She saw the letterhead, the seal of the court, the official signature of the judge. Marcus, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped closer. What is it, Soph? He asked, his voice losing its breezy arrogance. Sophia was silent. She just stared at the text. Her lips moved slightly, forming the technical words. Usufruct, residential rights, temporary injunction. I watched the color drain from her face. The locksmith took a full step backward, closer to the front gate. It's nothing, Marcus insisted, trying to take the paper. Just some old man's nonsense. Sophia pulled the document away from him. No, Marcus. Wait. She held the papers up directly beneath the light. Fixture. Her hands, which had been so steady with her clipboard, were starting to tremble violently. They had been so focused on the ownership that they forgot about the possession. Mr. Elias had explained it perfectly. When they initiated the probate proceedings, they based their claim on the primary deed of ownership. My name, their late mother's name. Simple enough. But years ago, when their mother and I restructured the estate planning to protect against exactly this kind of aggressive transfer, we had filed a separate, obscure amendment, a lifetime residential protection, a right of tenancy, a legal, unassailable right for me to occupy this specific dwelling until my death. They had inherited the financial value, the walls, the land, but they had not inherited the right to set foot inside without my express invitation. And what they were doing now was not an invitation. It was attempted forcible eviction. Sophia finally found her voice, high and thin. This is a lie. You can't do this, Papa. Marcus grabbed the paper, scanning the key paragraphs frantically. His eyes widened as he read the final clause, the one Mr. Elias had highlighted in yellow. The temporary injunction did not just stop their eviction attempt. It ruled that their immediate presence and constituted harassment and illegal trespass, given the legally protected residency status I held. They had come here with a van and a locksmith to throw me out. The judge's order now stated that they must vacate the premises immediately. The silence that followed was terrifyingly complete. Marcus started yelling, a raw, frustrated roar that cracked against the ceiling. "You deceitful old man! You sat here, acting confused, planning this behind our backs." I did not flinch. I had anticipated this anger. "I prepared my defense," I told him calmly. "You prepared your eviction." Sophia crumpled the edges of the court order, trying to destroy the evidence, but the heavy seal held fast. "We are your children," she wept, the tears of entitlement springing to her eyes. "We own this house." "You own the deed," I corrected her, keeping my voice low, steady. "I own the right to sit here until I choose otherwise." I pointed to the main door, where the locksmith was now quietly gathering his tools, trying to disappear. "The court order is clear, Sophia. You are not allowed to be here. Not today, not tomorrow, not while this injunction stands." Marcus threw the papers onto the floor. They fluttered down near my feet. He looked trapped, his face red and distorted by rage. He realized the severity of the trick. They had wasted time, money, and now they had given me the legal upper hand. They had to leave. They had come to change the locks. But they were the ones being locked out. Marcus grabbed Sophia's arm and dragged her towards the door. "Come on. We will call our lawyer. We will bury him in paperwork." Sophia hesitated at the threshold. She turned back to me, her eyes filled with hate and betrayal. "You will regret this, Papa," she hissed. I stood tall, feeling the unfamiliar weight of dignity settle back onto my shoulders. "I regret nothing," I replied, looking directly into her eyes. "I am simply standing on the ground you both told me I no longer deserved." They left. They climbed into the expensive white rental van and slammed the doors. The engine roared. I stood there until the sound of the tires crunching gravel faded into the neighborhood hum. Silence descended, deep, heavy, and absolute. I was alone again. But this time, I was alone inside my own walls. I looked at the crumpled court papers on the floor. I bent down slowly, picking them up. They were my shield, my temporary safety. I knew this was just the very beginning. They would not stop. They would escalate. They had tasted true defeat, and their pride would demand swift vengeance. But for today, the house was quiet. For today, I had won the battle of the front door. I locked the door myself. And then, I walked slowly back towards the writing desk and began to think about what defense I would need to prepare for Christmas. They arrived exactly at 4 o'clock, punctual in their disrespect. Elias was driving a large truck, parked aggressively at the curb. Clara carried a clipboard, acting like a property manager conducting a final inspection. They walked straight into the living room, their faces set in expressions of smug determination. They ignored the fact I was sitting right there, calmly sipping cold tea. They looked around, measuring the space with their eyes, already mentally tearing down the walls I'd spent a lifetime building. "Arthur," Elias started, using my first name, which always felt like a calculated punch of disrespect. "You didn't pack anything substantial. We expected better cooperation." "The deadline was today, Father," Clara added, her voice sharp and final. "We have movers scheduled for the heavy pieces tomorrow morning. You need to finalize your choices for the facility immediately." They stood side by side, a solid wall of planned hostility. They thought I was an inconvenience. They thought I was a broken piece of furniture they were finally replacing. I stood up slowly. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for their self-satisfaction to curdle into discomfort. "I appreciate your concern for my schedule," I said. My voice was steady, maybe too steady. It seemed to surprise them. "This isn't concern, Arthur. This is necessity," Elias snapped. "The house needs to be assessed. We need the equity released. You can't just live here indefinitely." "Indefinitely," I repeated the word. "That's what owning a home means, Clara. Or at least, it used to mean that." I walked over to the old mahogany desk, the one my grandfather gave me on my 21st birthday. I pulled out the thin, sealed legal packet I had been keeping wrapped in plastic and hidden beneath the blotter. It felt cold in my hands. It was the physical weight of months of agonizing over this single, devastating decision. Elias sneered. What is that, Dad? Your memoirs? Save it for the nursing home book club. I ignored him entirely. I walked back and placed the documents on the coffee table, smoothing the creases carefully. When you issued your informal notice, I began, my eyes fixed on the signed signatures on the eviction threat they had sent last week. You initiated a legal process. You asserted control over this property. You asserted the right to dispossession. They exchanged a quick, smug look. Yes, we are protecting the asset, Clara confirmed, puffing out her chest. And you made a mistake, I said softly. I slid the top document toward them. It was titled, boldly, in capitalized letters, Judicial Order of Restraint and Immediate Dispossession. Clara laughed first, a short, nervous puff of air, followed by a squeak. What is this? A joke, Dad? Did you find some novelty paper? Elias picked up the document. His face, usually flushed red with self-importance, started to drain of color. He read the first paragraph. Then he read it again, moving his lips slightly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and uncertain. What did you do? He whispered. The aggression was entirely gone from his voice. You acted on the assumption that my lifetime right to occupancy was easily revoked because you are my heirs, I explained, watching the life drain from his eyes. You mistook my willingness to share the space for ownership transfer. Your letter asserting dispossession rights gave my lawyer the precise opening he needed. I paused, letting the cold reality settle on them. It demonstrated your intent to illegally occupy property not yet in your legal possession. You acted as if I was already gone. This allowed my counsel to file an expedited order. It's our house, Clara shouted, stepping forward violently, gesturing toward the mortgage papers from decades ago. No, Clara, it is my house. Fully. Legally, I stated, my voice cutting through her panic. And I used your own aggression against you, because you tried to exert unauthorized authority over my primary residence. The court has ruled that you are attempting illegal trespass and unauthorized occupation. I gently tapped the last page, pointing to the seal. The restraining order is effective immediately. It forbids Elias and Clara from entering this residence, contacting me for financial matters related to this property, or attempting to coerce me into selling or vacating. Should you refuse to comply, enforcement is authorized. Elias threw the papers back onto the table. This is insane. We are your children. You can't legally evict your own children. I'm not evicting my children, I corrected him calmly. I am removing trespassers who attempted to steal my home through emotional manipulation and the threat of physical relocation. The court saw it clearly, and the order includes immediate removal if compliance is refused. Just then, the doorbell rang. I had prearranged everything. The lawyer had advised maximum prudence and zero tolerance for further emotional abuse. I walked slowly to the door and opened it. 2 uniformed officers from the city's compliance division stood on the porch. They were professional, completely impassive. Mr. Arthur Davies? The senior officer asked. Yes, they are inside. They have been served the order. Elias started yelling immediately, his voice booming and cracking in the silence of the large room. This is ridiculous. Unbelievable betrayal. You hired police against your own son. The officer stepped inside, his presence cooling the entire temperature of the room. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He just held up one hand, signaling Elias to stop speaking. Sir, ma'am, we have a confirmed judicial order of restraint and dispossession concerning this address. You must gather your immediate personal belongings and vacate the premises within 5 minutes. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention and potentially charges of contempt of court. Clara's composure finally shattered completely. She looked at me, her eyes suddenly wet, not with sorrow, but with pure, boiling, venomous hatred. You did this. You betrayed us for wood and bricks, Father. You betrayed me for wood and bricks, I countered quietly. I merely kept what was already mine. It was a painful, ugly scramble. They didn't have much inside, thankfully. Elias grabbed his briefcase. Clara snatched her expensive scarf from the coat rack by the entrance. They moved with a frustrated, jerky speed, utterly humiliated by the presence of the officers. Elias paused right at the threshold, leaning close to me, dropping his voice low and guttural. "You think this is over? You just destroyed your family, Arthur. You are going to die alone in this cold monument to spite?" The officer cleared his throat sharply behind him. Elias flinched, remembering he was not in charge here, and stepped outside. I stood in the doorway and watched them walk down the porch steps. The large moving truck, the symbol of their arrogance and certainty, suddenly looked pathetic and ridiculous. They climbed into their separate, expensive cars without speaking a single word to each other. They didn't look back. The sound of the engines fading down the street was the loudest, emptiest sound I had heard all year. The officers waited until the vehicles were entirely out of sight, confirmed the locks were secure, and wished me a good evening. Then they too were gone, leaving me alone with the silence. I walked back into the living room. The spot where Elias had thrown the papers was empty. I picked up the stack of court documents. They were my victory. They were my absolute defeat. I sat down on the sofa, the same spot where I had celebrated countless birthdays, grieved the loss of my wife, and watched those two children grow up into people I didn't know. Now, the space was mine again, entirely and exclusively. But the house was too big for one tired, suddenly very old man. I looked at the walls. Every nail hole, every patch of chipped paint, every creaking floorboard held a memory. A memory of laughter, yes, but also the fresh, stinging memory of the past few months. The dismissive tone, the hurried, impatient visits, the chilling assumption that my life was over, just because my usefulness to them had expired. I had won the battle for the deed, but I knew in that silent living room that I had lost the war for my heart. Justice, I realized then, doesn't feel like triumph or celebration. It feels like exhausting, painful solitude. The evening stretched ahead of me. I ate a simple, solitary meal. The leftovers were abundant. I made a mental note, a painful little tick in my brain. No need to buy enough food for 3 people anymore. I sat by the phone, expecting a desperate, maybe even apologetic call, a plea for reconciliation, or at least an acknowledgement of the depth of their error. Nothing came. Only the low, constant hum of the refrigerator broke the silence. The house was secured, yes. I had proven my dignity. I had shown them that disrespect comes with painful consequences. But what now? Was I supposed to live out my remaining years guarding this huge, empty trophy, ensuring they never stepped foot on the porch again? That felt like a cage I had built for myself, just as confining as the nursing home they had planned. My lawyer had called this Phase 1, securing the residence and establishing sole ownership. Phase 2 was imminent, waiting just past the midnight hour. Now that the ownership was unequivocally established and the threat of illegal seizure was removed, I held all the true cards. I could sell the house immediately. I could give the proceeds to a charity that supported vulnerable elders. I could leave everything to the kind nurse who helped me with my appointments, the only person who had treated me with simple human respect recently. The options were endless, but they all felt incredibly heavy. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, my feet heavy on the steps, echoing in the vast, empty space. I looked at the dark street through the window. Their shadows were gone. The threat was gone. I knew I had to make a final decision, a clean break. The justice was served, yes, but the story was not finished. It was time to decide how to use the quiet power I had just reclaimed. It wasn't about spite anymore. It was about defining the final chapter of my own life, free from their toxic shadow. I needed sleep, but the answer was waiting for me in the morning light. I would call the lawyer, not to fight another battle, but to start selling the house, and with it, selling the ghost of the family that used to live here.